In this video, I wanted to touch on something that I think isn't talked about enough in terms of modern faith and what that implies. Um, I think in a lot of our, I have I have a lot of grievances that I could talk about when it comes to modern religion and the culture that has sort of grown up around modern day viewpoints of religion, the nature of God and stuff like that. And that could be, a freaking series in itself. But I think a fundamental thing that is missing is this notion of responsibility, of accountability, and self-determination, and, in a word, discipline when it comes to, like you could say, almost the new age. But I think in a kind of, I don't know if irony is the word, but in a kind of irony, there there are really two manifestations of this flaw um, that I believe ought to be addressed more. You have the new age sort of neo hippie pagan esque pathways in all their variety. Anything from Wicca to uh, belief in ancient mythologies like the Norse or things like that. You have that to crystals, divination, tarot. I mean, there's all kinds of different features of like the New Age movement and religion that's sort of evolved. Um, but also you have, I almost I'm almost tempted to say a counter reformation of the Christian variety, the Christian version of this New Age trend. And one of the glaring features, in my opinion, of this New Age trend is the lack of the notion of accountability when it comes to faith. I don't know how many New Age esque books I have read, speaking of the more spiritual, pagan, New Age side. I don't know how many of the books I've read in that flavor that talk about how there's no rules, how there's every path is perfectly valid, that God is, rules and order and truth versus untruth, things like this are seen as like antithetical almost. They're portrayed as antithetical. They're portrayed as an evil, even. Structure, institutional. I don't know how many times I've heard institutionalized religion is the biggest problem, yada yada, as if, never mind. But there's that, but interestingly, there's a Christian, more mainstream version of that, in that no one talks about hell, no one talks about accountability, no one talks about divine justice, for example, or sin. And it's almost as if the word sin or unrighteousness, if you had to use that phrase, itself has become a sin, has become almost a swear word. Everything's kind of like, God is our therapist. God has become the counselor, by and large. God caters to us, caters to our needs. God serves us. That's problematic for a couple reasons. Not least, the main reason it's problematic to view the source of, you could say the source of all morality would be God. To view God in such a way as to cater to us, to our human nature, as to sort of serve us, meant to be there for us, that can be problematic in the understanding, I believe, of the true nature of God. Because it takes away the accountability of it all. It takes away what might seem a primitive to like a woke person. It might seem a primitive thing of structure and rules and discipline. And really it's discipline at the end of the day. Religion, in my definition, is discipline. You could use those words interchangeably. It's giving yourself to something greater than yourself. It's giving yourself to something greater than your emotions. Giving yourself to something greater than your circumstances or things which cause you harm, things which inhibit you. So actually, ironically, by serving God, by taking that submission role toward the divine, you're actually freed. And that's something that many of these churches, like I've been to a number of churches, that's something that many of these churches not only lack, but actually openly defy. If not explicitly, then implicitly. There's no mention of sin. There's no mention of how we fall short. It's all about God being there on a rainy day. It's all about how useful God can be to us. And that is, I wouldn't say wrong as much as I would say incomplete. That is, in my view, an incomplete definition or an incomplete imagery of what I believe the divine to be, the nature of, the source of all things. And it's for that reason that I wanted to talk about accountability, the nature and how that relates to the nature of God. And again, like, I know that I'm sorry, this is like a disorganized mess. I mean, besides this area, these videos are just, all over the place. I'm going to try to keep a coherent series on certain specific topics or whatever throughout the time that I ever do these. But I think there's a lot of wisdom that can be derived from the Bible, specifically parts of the Old Testament, which I haven't touched on. I've looked a lot at the New Testament sayings of Jesus, but I wanted to bring up, kind of going back, delving back a little ways into the book. One of my absolute favorite books is Proverbs. I don't know how many of you have read. Basically, Proverbs, a book that's called Ecclesiastes. There's even the Psalms, allegedly written by David, and then the Proverbs were written allegedly by King Solomon of the state of Israel, like way back in the BCs. But it's I think this writing is packed full of wisdom and of valuable gems. And I absolutely love it. I love Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. I mean, if you ever get the chance, sit down and just like read through some of the verses. It's really mind opening. But one of the very first verses in the book of Proverbs, and again, this was allegedly written by a King Solomon, who was like a super wise dude, king of Israel. One of the first verses comes in verse 7 of chapter 1, and it's pretty famous. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. This version renders, I've heard that verse said wisdom, but knowledge, wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And I was sort of like thinking about what that means, because that verse and the implication of that verse, if you read it at face value, can be standoffish. It can be almost gross to think that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Like, in order to be wise, you have to fear the Lord, or fear God. But it's true. Um, and it does mean fear. Fear means respect. Fear is often the passageway of respect. And I think to a person who understands the surface value of certain words, that word is useful in that sense. Fear provides respect. But what does it mean to fear what does it mean to fear God? The word fear actually kind of is insufficient in the English, because it's a type of respect that goes deeper than a mutual respect, maybe of like a human to human friendship. I respect you, you respect me. It's more of a covenant. But this is talking about, I think, a feeling of the absolute dependence that we have on God, the absolute dependence that we have on that which gives us being, which we believe in faith to be God, the absolute dependence we have. God is, and I guess I'm gonna get kind of preachy here, God is absolutely a raging fire. God is the source of all things. God is needless and independent. But we literally live our lives in this fleeting world in things that we think actually mean things. Time is a great thief. And that which is timeless is God. So, respecting that to the highest degree that the word respect can mean is wise. And that's what it means. In comparison to God, in comparison to that authority, nothing else matters in the end. If we hang on to God, the substance of a moral life, the substance of what it means to live well, if we hang on to that, then what else could mean anything? So fearing that, having the utmost respect as possible is extremely important. And that also, I mean, there's so many places I've seen that talk about what can I get from God? What can I get out of my faith? What, me. And the notion of devotion, the notion of surrender is lost when our focus is the fear of our lacking what we want and not the fear of God, not the fear, not the respect, not the adoration of God, but the adoration of what we want out of life and what we fail to get. That passion replaces the humility of submitting to God. And that's like a dangerous road to go down because it can lead to many evils, many excesses, darkness, and I could go on for like half an hour or more about this, but I think the length of this one is good. So, thanks for watching.